Welcome to the Old Fashioned Podcast. Today we have a lot of things to talk about. This is our second episode. We have topics all the way from the slaughtering of Christians in Nigeria and across the Muslim world on a whole to the potential end of the Democrat government shutdown, their hatred and their spewing of violence that is creeping in to what seems to be every corner of our nation as they continue to lie about it repeatedly. So the first thing that I want to talk about, which is probably the um, the part most personal to me and the part that should be most personal to our country as a whole, is the mass genocide of Christians in Nigeria, in the larger Middle East, in the larger world as a whole. So over and over, we hear the establishment tell us how much there are victims and persecuted groups across the world, marginalized communities, but not once do they mention Christians. They always view Christians as the perpetrators, as the violent ones, and as the colonial tyrants that they want to overthrow because, again, liberalism is rooted in Marxist ideology, which splits all of human history into the dichotomy between the oppressors and the oppressed. Marx used economic lens, but racial and gendered lenses are becoming much more prominent across the Western left. These groups believe that the only way to overthrow the oppressors, which are white Christian men, is to have a revolution and then install a dictatorship of the proletariat. They view conservatives, even though conservatives have largely lost all power in major institutions, including Hollywood and academia, as fascists and as Nazis. They want to kill us. They want to install their dictatorship of the proletariat. They want to have an absolute control of all of state and all of culture, and they want to see the blending of the two entirely. Conservatives understand that there are overlap between the society, the culture, and the body politic, but the liberals see no division at all. All they see is one big glob of people to be artificially controlled by an authoritarian state in the name of progress. Anyways, Christians in Nigeria are being killed at very alarming rates that no other group, to my knowledge, have been dying like this for decades and decades and decades. Since 2009, in 2023, according to the Vatican, 52,250 Christians have been murdered in Nigeria. This is one of the most appalling numbers I've ever seen. Largely, I think the number is close to 100,000 Christians have been killed since 2009 across the Muslim world. This is because in Christian countries, Muslims can build mosques and believe in their religion, while in Muslim countries, Christians have their heads chopped off for uttering a Christian prayer. Many churches have been attacked. 18,000 churches attacked, 2,200 Christian schools destroyed, according to the Vatican News. The Vatican has been reporting that these are horrible numbers and urging Christians to pray for their fellow brothers and sisters. From the period 2019 to 2023, the Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa reports 6,769 Christians killed across Nigeria in 9,970 attacks. These are numbers that have also been reported in some sense by the president. President Trump has woken a lot of people up to this. I didn't even know about how absurd this was. I knew Christians were being persecuted across the world, but I did not realize how many there were. Now, Trump, of course, released, I don't know if you saw it, a Truth Social response where he says that he is designating Nigeria as a country of particular interest, and that if the Nigerian government does not make sure that this genocide ends, Trump is going to have to intervene with American troops, because, in Trump's word, Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. I couldn't have said it better myself. Trump is pointing a lot of people to this because it's largely not being talked about at all. Again, for years and years and years, we hear about all the marginalized communities, how everyone's a victim, how everyone is suffering, how we need to all be grand marshals in the Pride Parade, while Christians are being slaughtered, while Christians are the most persecuted group in the world. They do not talk about us because they actually hate us. They hate everything old, good, and true. So of course there's been responses from the left-wing media to attack Trump rather than actually attacking the radical Islamists who are murdering Christians. There's this one post in particular, not a post, an article that was released by the New York Times, where they said that opinion, Trump aid cuts, talking about the funding cuts to U.S. aid, which is doing things like seeing what kind of liquor makes fish act more aggressive, or schizophrenic chimps. They have these crazy, just strange experiments that they're doing all across the globe. They're having contemporary art classes in the Middle East. They're giving contraception to countries in Africa. Trump said, no, we're not going to waste this money while we're trillions of dollars in debt, and he cuts it. And they say that Trump aid cuts kill more Christians than jihadists do. That was sent out 3 days ago. Yeah. And then you have some outlets. I think this is the Washington Post. What was the one up here? The one up there, that was the New York Times. Washington Post, instead of talking about how many Christians are being killed, they said, and I quote, how the president came to see the fate of Christians in West Africa as a national security priority, seemingly out of the blue, illustrates the unusual ways that information travels in the Trump White House, sometimes allowing interest groups and individuals to rapidly shape major policy decisions. That was the response to Trump saying that thousands of Christians are being murdered in Nigeria and that the Nigerians have to do something about it before we actually do something about it ourselves. The response was to attack the way information travels around the White House, because at the end of the day, they care about one thing, and it's their endless push for quote-unquote progress. But again, liberalism progresses like a cancer. It's not actually good progress. It's disastrous progress. Progress that erodes and destroys. And that's all they care about. It's actually very sad because, largely we're a Christian country. We're founded by Christians. We're, in our Constitution, it excludes, the Senate from doing things on Sundays, or says that Sundays don't count as ordinary days because, that's the Lord's Day. That's the day people go to church. Constitution mentions things about the year of our Lord when it speaks about, it doesn't use current era, it says the year of our Lord. The Articles of Confederation, which is before the Constitution, mentions the great governor of the universe, or great governor of the world, being God. The Founding Fathers understood that the country was made for a moral, religious people. Specifically, a quote came out of the Founding Fathers saying that not just religionists, which are people who just practice religion, but specifically Christians, but this virtue has seemed to be forgotten largely. We forget that the West, which is the greatest culture in the entire history of the world, is Christendom. And you have this strange push that came out of the Enlightenment to divorce Christendom from Christianity, which is why we just call it the West. And this has been an endless downward spiral, which has led where we are today, where the death of Christians is viewed more as a political game for the largest political party in the world, largest political party in America being the Democrats rather than an actual concern. But I'm not even that shocked about it. This is just what they do. Next, I want to talk about the government shutdown a little bit. Shift away from this more sad news, and then maybe a happier news also involving the imbeciles that we call the Democrat Party. The government shutdown may or may not be coming to an end. My hopes are high. I think it's going to happen sometime this week. Right now, of recording this, it's November 11th. Still, nothing official has really happened except for 8 prominent Democrats leaving Chuck Schumer, actually blaming Chuck Schumer for the shutdown, and wanting to move in the way of reopening the government. Because again, to pass this clean resolution, you need to have 60 votes in the Senate. Right now, there's only 53 Republicans. Every single Republican except for one, I'm pretty sure it's Rand Paul, voted to keep the government open, while every single Democrat except for 4, including 1 independent, voted to shut down the government. That's not enough votes to keep everything open, but now 8 Democrats are moving to the side of opening the government, which allows the CR to get through. Now, a lot of Democrats, I don't know if you talk to them, it's kind of strange. It's a strange experience talking to them because they'll say things and you're like, what are you talking about? It's kind of one of those moments. Anyways, a big thing is blaming Trump for this shutdown. It's Trump's fault. It's the Republicans' fault. They say the Republicans control the Senate, the House, and the White House. Why can't this get this bill through? And then you always see the little segue. It's where they lose on one point and they just quickly move over and over and over again. So they say, well, if Republicans control, both these powerhouses, the 2 chambers in the White House, why can't they get this bill, this CR through? It's their fault. It's their fault. And then you say, well, you need 60 votes in the Senate, and the Democrats are largely voting to keep the government shut down. And they say, well, and they switch, and then they say, well, the Republicans aren't coming to the table. And then you say, well, Trump actually, met with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer to talk about reopening the government in the White House. They say, they're still just not doing enough. They're not doing enough. And then you have to say, well, clearly Republicans are doing things behind the scene because we're getting the CR finally passed. I didn't realize that it was going to be so long. I think we're going on 42 days of a government shutdown, the longest in American history. And it's absurd that the Democrats were keeping the country hostage. That's what they were doing. They were saying, well, 1 in 8 Americans rely on SNAP. And Republicans are going to have those people starve. Notice how it's always the apocalypse with these people, and it's always Trump's fault. Trump's he's just always starting the apocalypse. 1 in 8 Americans are going to starve because of Donald Trump. Just think about that. Does that make sense? Does that make sense that a president has the power to let 1 in 8 Americans starve? No, it doesn't make sense because it's not true. So you have the SNAP program, which is just food stamps. And you have, sure, if you have 1 in 8 Americans, that number's suspect. It's not that it's suspect because I don't believe 1 in 8 Americans are on food stamps. It's suspect because what are we doing? Why do we have 1 in 8 Americans on food stamps? Anyways, that's besides the point. We'll get to that. But the main issue is Democrats chose to shut the government down. And they chose to shut it down for no reason except a last-ditch effort. Why is it a last-ditch effort? Because everything they've been saying before this is unpopular with the American people. All of their actions, their party is sinking insanely with popularity. No one likes them. They don't even like themselves. They don't even like each other. So what we're seeing is a decrease in the brand. CNN came out and said the brand of Democrats is shrinking entirely. After this government shutdown, they did a poll. What are your view of Congress Democrats and Congress Republicans? Republicans go up in points, Democrats go down in points, because people they're really just unhappy with them because they keep doing dumb stuff. They're not the smartest. All right, I'm like, sorry to be the bearer of bad news for the Democrats. You dumb, because they hitched their horses to the wagons of transgenderism and illegal immigration, and those are two very unpopular opinions, and they grew to such prominence because they were pushed at every single level. And it was too much. People said, actually, we're rejecting the entire party so extremely that we're going to vote in the first president in 20 years with the popular vote. First Republican president in 20 years with the popular vote. Because the people spoke and they did elect on a mandate. It was a close margin. You can see that in the Congress, where it's a close margin where you're able to have the minority party shut down the government for 41 days because we don't have enough votes to pass the CR. Okay. The main excuse, though, for them shutting down the government, because what they were trying to say is Republicans want to increase premiums on healthcare, which Republicans are kind of circling around healthcare because it would be very unpopular to cut funding, to raise premiums, even if it's good to do so, even if it's good for the long term. It's so unpopular that if Republicans want to win the midterms, if they want to win the next presidency, they kind of have to chisel away. It's a more like gentle chiseling away at the current healthcare regime, which is, it's horrible. It's the Barack Obama, Joe Biden healthcare regime. But the Democrats try to pass this all off as healthcare. It's all about healthcare. Republicans are going to raise your premiums. They're going to cut fundings. People are going to starve. And they say all this stuff. And it goes back to the Big Beautiful Bill, which is important to understand. In the Big Beautiful Bill, it touched on a bunch of things because it was big and beautiful. But on healthcare, specifically on healthcare, the bill talks about these main 3 points. The main 3 points are if you're from the ages, I think it's 19 to 64, you have to be in your able body. You have to either work, train to work, or go to school if you want to be eligible for Medicaid. Right? You have Medicare, which is for the elderly. You have Medicaid, which is for the lower class. If you do not meet that criteria, you're not eligible. I think most people can agree with that. If you're able to work, you should either work, go to school, or train for work. Else you can't live off of the public dime. The next one is you have to be a citizen. I don't know many people who say non-citizens should be covered entirely for, have a government paid for insurance and healthcare. That's very unpopular. And it groups in with the unpopularity of illegal immigration on the whole. And the other one is allowing the state governments to have control over their Medicaid programs rather than the national government controlling everything from ahead, because it's just too big of a program. There's too many people to be dealt with, specifically in Washington, D.C. You're going to have to give the states some more autonomy over that. And those are the 3 main points that the Big Beautiful Bill touches on in the idea of healthcare, and I think people are fans of those 3 things. And if Republicans have to get better at marketing, they have to say these are the big 3 things in the bill, Big Beautiful Bill about healthcare. Boom, 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 boom. All right, people like those. The CR, the Clean Resolution, is trying to be passed as Republicans, including a bunch of Republican spending stuff, and cutting government and cutting healthcare. And the Democrats, they just really don't want this to happen. They just really want to be there for you, the American people. And they don't want you to lose your benefits. They don't want your prices to rise. The CR is Biden-era spending. That's true. If you look it up, because Google is paid for, it will say, actually, it's not the same CR. Yeah, it's not the same CR because under Biden it wasn't a CR. Because a CR is specifically a clean resolution, which is saying we're taking past spending and we're bringing it over. It wasn't a CR under Biden, but it was a continuing of funding as the previous year, and they're not negotiating. That's what a CR. They're not renegotiating a change of spending. So the Republican Party lapsed on their budget, time wise, like the time lapsed, and they weren't able to push through a Republican spending bill. So they had to get the CR, or else the government would shut down. They said, well, we're going to bring the CR, we're going to just continue Biden spending until we can figure out our own spending bill. They voted under, the Democrats voted for this spending under Biden. They voted for it in the House of Representatives, but when it gets to the Senate, the Democrats choose to shut down the government for 41 days. Why? For no actual reason. Because it's Biden era spending, so it's a Democrat spending, and it is something they voted on previously. It's really sad, the level of lack of information on this, how people still are continuing to say that it's Trump's fault. It's not even close to being Trump's fault. Under Biden, the CRs were passed so much easier with bipartisan support because the Republicans didn't want to shut the government down. They wanted to keep things functioning until things were negotiated. But there's a stalemate right now where the Democrats are choosing to hold the country hostage. They say that the SNAP program includes 1 in 8 Americans, and even with that knowledge, they choose to shut the government down, including the SNAP program. And they say, well, Republicans are letting people starve. No, actually, you are, because it's not a Republican spending bill; it's a Democrat spending bill, and you're the people who have to vote to keep the government open because it's a 60-vote necessity in the Senate. But you're deciding to just be just gross and evil. And this really needs to get pushed. The Republicans need to get better at spending, at marketing, because the deal is, the Democrats are going to pick up more and more wins, as we saw in the gubernatorial and mayoral races, if they keep having better marketing, okay? Because it's, just the same way you have the brands for the parties, right? You have the Democrat brand, which is sinking, and the Republican brand, which is slowly increasing. With a brand, you need marketing, okay? And if the Democrats dominate marketing, we will lose over and over and over again, okay? I know New Jersey's blue, and I know Virginia's kind of a toss-up. Virginia's more of the shock, and I know New York City was probably going to go to Mamdani anyways. But those people also had better marketing. They know how to talk to the people, and they know the big thing, which is affordability, because it's always the economy that's the central issue, right? When the economy is doing well, other issues will take its place. When it's not doing well, all other issues are tied to the economy. So when we talk about illegal immigration, that is tied to the economy, because American jobs are getting taken and their illegal aliens are living off the tax dollar. When we talk about transgenderism, a big thing is governments paying for it. That's a big issue, but it's more separate than that. That's a little more divorced from the economy. But most issues circle around the economy. Why are we giving money to foreign countries? Why are we doing all these things when we're in debt? Why are we doing all these things when the newer generation can't buy a house? It all circles around the economy, and if Democrats keep tapping into that, they're eventually going to break through and win. Now, we can't let that happen because they have horrible economic plans. We're sadly going to see with Mamdani what the extreme version of a Democrat economy is, which is socialism, right? It's the state taking over elements of that, of private industry and private property. But if they keep tapping into affordability, they keep going to win the short-term elections, and they're going to just keep doing that over and over again, because most people do not stay as in tap with politics to the extent that they can see every single thing getting said, or they have time to actually research specific bills. They see quick ads where the Democrats talk about affordability and the Republicans keep talking about things that are not seen as important. We have to tie things to affordability, and we have to market the fact that we're not raising premiums for healthcare, and we have to talk about the fact that tariffs aren't actually increasing prices. It's actually the industries that are eating those prices, as the federal chair just came out. That's what we're talking about. Alright, but anyways, the government shutdown probably coming to an end, hopefully, and also the Democrats are losing the shutdown largely, so I guess that's some good news, but whatever. Okay. Elections have been won by the Democrats recently, right? Virginia was the biggest shock, right? New Jersey was strange because you saw the Democrats and the Republican gubernatorial candidates tied in the polls, and then the Democrat won. It's not the biggest shock. I mean, it's New Jersey. We see Mamdani wins, and we even saw that he won by such an amount that if Sliwa dropped out and all of Sliwa's points went to Cuomo, Mamdani still would have won. But the biggest thing is New Jersey. Why is New Jersey important? I don't really care so much about the gubernatorial candidate, Abigail Spanberger. Whatever, I don't really care. What I do care, I mean, it was closest, 55 to 44, 11-point lead. It's not the closest thing, but whatever. The Attorney General, Jay Jones, won the race in Virginia. Jay Jones had a group chat leak. Not a group chat, it was a direct messaging between one person and another person, where he said that he wanted Republicans to die. He wanted Republicans' children to die in their mother's arms. He wanted to pee on the graves of Republicans. And he not only stayed in the race, he was endorsed by the Democrat Party and prominent Democrats, and he won. Okay? What that should tell us is that we're living in such a time where the partisan conflict is so grave that there is open, and you can say, well, wasn't that open? It was in a group chat. It got leaked, and he didn't really take it back. He didn't even bother to drop out. I don't remember this time because I'm too young and the Democrats have been radical since forever. But it used to be where a candidate would do one little embarrassing thing and they'd have to drop out. But now, instead of dropping out, they get endorsed when they talk about wanting their political adversaries to get killed. And this just goes back to the entire point, which it's not about marketing, it's not about affordability, right? Well, that's what you need to win elections, but largely it's hatred. Hatred is the lifeblood of the Democrat Party, and it's what keeps pushing their radical candidates to win. Okay? So when Mamdani says that there's no problem too big for government to solve and no problem too small for government to care about, he wins on that because of the radicalism within the base of the Democrat Party. When Jay Jones stays in the race and gets endorsed after saying that the children of Republicans should die in their mother's arms, he wins because of the radicalism within the party. The radicalism and the hatred is the lifeblood of the Democrat Party. That's just true. And I have the numbers to back it up. So this is a poll from YouGov, which is just a polling agency. They asked a couple of questions. The first question was, do you think it's ever justified for citizens to resort to violence in order to achieve political goals? Now, most Americans, 72%, according to this poll, say, no, it's never justified. Violence is never justified. That's just not what America is about. 6% prefer not to say, and 12% say they're not sure. 11% of Americans say that, yeah, violence is sometimes justified to reach political ends. Now, the prefer not to say most likely just groups in with the yes, but they just don't want to say it, okay? Because if a question is, do you think we should commit violence? You saying, I prefer not to answer, is saying, yeah, I just don't want to say it. Now, based on political ideology, because they're asking deep questions in this poll, a moderate, and I'm just going to forget about the middle numbers and just focus on the two extremes, which is no, it's never justified, yes, it's sometimes justified. Moderate Americans, 72% say no, never justified, 9% say sometimes is justified. If you go to the conservative side, it's actually 83% of conservatives say no, 6% say yes. If you go to the very conservative Americans, 88% say no, never. And the figure is so small for the sometimes that it's not even appearing on this graph. Now, if you go to the liberal side of it, 68, so again, moderates, 72% say never justified. That number drops to 68 with liberals, where 17% of liberals say sometimes it's justified. Now, when you go to very liberal, stay with me, the number of very liberal people saying that violence is never justified for politics drops again to 55%, and this sometimes justified number increases to 25%. What does that say? 1 in 4 very liberal Americans believe that political violence is justified. 1 in 4 very liberal Americans believe that political violence is justified. Here's the next question. Do you think it's ever justified for citizens to resort to violence in self-defense / in order to achieve political goals? So they contrast it between whether violence is justified in self-defense or for political goals. Among United States adults, 65% of U.S. adults say violence is justified in self-defense. 10% say violence is justified for political goals. Now, if you look at the age, because age is also a very important factor, 65 and up, which is those are your boomers, you have 69% of Americans who are 65 and older say self-defense is okay, while it's 3% for their political violence. Now, when you get to 18 years and up, this is 18 to 25, this is where the number gets interesting. 60% of 18 to 29-year-olds believe that self-defense, violence in the name of self-defense, is okay. Wow, 22% of the same age group say that it is okay for political violence. So you see a 21-point increase between 65 and up and 18 to 29-year-olds who justify political violence. And it's a decrease in self-defense. So what this says is these people are just wrong about everything and they're insane. But it's, oh, well, can we break this down even deeper? Yes. If you go to conservatives, specifically conservatives, it's 71% of conservatives say self-defense, violence justified. Only 7% say political violence justified. With liberals, it goes 68-18. So it drops for self-defense again, but among liberals, and increases more than double for political violence among liberals. The left is violent. They're hateful. It's the lifeblood of their party. It's the lifeblood of their base. They will continue to win elections with radical candidates, okay? Because you see this shift, and I've been talking about this for a while, where Gen Z is one of the most political generations we've ever seen. They're political, in two senses. You have Gen Z being the most conservative generation in recent years, and also Gen Z being the most liberal generation in recent years. So it's this drastic split between them. They're very, very political, and they're very, very split. And this is why. Okay. This isn't your Gen X and boomer liberalism and conservatism where it's almost identical and they believe the same things pretty much. It's not, well, I believe in lower taxes, well, I believe in higher taxes for government programs. Or I believe war in this area, but I don't want war in this area, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm a neocon, and I'm a liberal, and I'm an interventionist, and I believe in spreading democracy around the whole world. It's not that. This is fundamental endpoints and logical endpoints for these ideologies. Conservatism is not even an ideology, I would say, because ideologies, I like to think of them as ideas that are above the head in the sense that they're in this metaphysical space and they get so tangled with each other because they're not applied, right? It's just these points that you can write down on paper and they sound really, really smart, but when we apply them and they fail, we say, well, that's not actually true. That's not true socialism. Socialism failed. That's not true socialism, right? Well, conservatism is just like an applied theory. It's saying, well, we have these universal truths that we can see across time and culture, universal morality, universal human rights, just practices of people, and we apply them and they work, so we continue to apply them, right? But you have these ideas, which is liberalism, which again goes back to the very concept of this weird merger between the Enlightenment and socialism. You have the Enlightenment, which says, and the two have a history of being intertwined with each other because they both take God out of everything. That's what it is. At the end of the day, the Enlightenment says, well, we want to preserve the West, but we want to get rid of that foundation of the West, which is the church. And then socialism also rejects the church, with Marx saying religion the opium of the masses and replacing it with a tyrannical state. So it's hyper-individuality that comes from the Enlightenment, and then also state worship, which comes from socialism, and they're blurred together in a little jumbly mess. And then you have conservatism, which I'm talking about Western conservatism, right? I don't want to conserve like like an Ethiopian tribe or some Eastern European, Eastern Asian culture. Not that I hate those people, but it's just I'm a Westerner and I like the West. I think that the West is the best. So when I say I want to reintroduce the church as the fundamental essence of our society, without it, everything collapses. It is the foundation of everything. All of our morality and all of our traditions come from that. I believe tradition is valuable to an extent which I can't even really explain with words. And I'm not even just talking about traditions like, oh, these are the rituals we do, this is the holidays we observe. Even though those are important, we want to be part of a shared culture. We want to be part of a shared country. We want to speak a shared language. We want to love each other. We want to have a shared faith and a shared belief that we can have a common conversation with each other. If someone's Catholic or Christian broadly and believes in the fundamental principles, and someone else is a secular, materialist, socialist, LGBTQ, whatever activist, there's not a lot of conversation. You can have some conversation because they're a rational human being, but one of those people are completely wrong about everything and the other one's right about everything. So we have to understand that we have to have shared universal principles that we can apply to every single level, right? That's what conservatism is. It's taking our Christian virtues that have been passed on through the ages and applying them politically, socially, economically, culturally, at every single level. Because that is the lifeblood. And that's what it comes down to. What is the lifeblood of our party? What's the lifeblood of our ideas? Is it radicalism and hatred? Or is it love, charity, hope, virtue, truth, and largely Christianity? Right. It's about the attack on Christianity. The attack of Christians who are slaughtered in Nigeria and the Middle East. And it's the attack of Christianity in the West. And again, you have to understand, conservatism acknowledges history, which liberalism does not. Right? I like to say, conservatives say there have been countless people who lived before me who have thought questions that I think and have found answers. Let me see if I can piece together the answers. Liberalism acknowledges the same premise and comes to the conclusion that they have all the answers themselves. But what you have to understand, studying history, is that the West is the leader of the world, at least in semi-modern history, but for a large chunk of it, it's the starting place for ideas, right? Ideas and culture trickles down from the West to the rest of the world, while you have the second and third world, which is largely where the physical problems lie, right? Whether it be this is where the natural resources are, or whether it be this is where the wars are, and then you have this kind of this balancing act. But the two are deeply interconnected with each other, especially in our more global age. So you have the idea war, the ideological war in the West, which is Christianity getting persecuted by the idea of liberalism, liberalism swiping at the Christian virtues and removing Christianity from Christian institutions, right? Universities founded by Christians are having Christianity removed from it. Art, like Hollywood, just paintings, music, anything that was, very expanded upon by Christians. You have the Renaissance that happened in Christian Italy by Christians that revolutionized art. That entire thing is getting swiped at. You have the political body, our Constitution, written by Christians, our country, founded by Christians, getting swiped at. Even down to the mainline Protestant churches getting swiped at. That's the ideological persecution of Christianity, and then you see the physical persecution of Christianity in the second and third world, where Nigeria in the broader Muslim world, Christians are being persecuted. It's not new. I'm not shocked by it. I'm saddened by it, but it's not shocking to me. It's not something that astonishes. I'm like, whoa, how is this happening? No, it's always happening, because it's always a war against Christianity. It's not, they're against fiscal conservatism. They just want to really spend all our money really bad, or they're very just naive, or they just don't like the founding fathers for who they are, or they don't like Columbus for who he is. They want to just, they just think Christianity is actually pagan, or they think Halloween is actually pagan, or they think Thanksgiving is a genocide holiday, and they have these beliefs that are held in vacuums. No, these are all attacks on Christianity. Thanksgiving, Christians giving thanks to God because they were able to survive on settled land, and they actually did have a good relationship with a specific Indian tribe. You have Christmas. It actually is a Christian holiday, right? The oldest tracing of the Christmas holiday and the pagan holidays like Yule or the Feast of Saturn or Venus, whatever, are the same exact calendar, right? It's that there's a calendar, I forget the exact name, but it marks the dates of the exact thing. So the oldest date that we can find for the pagan holidays is actually like the same time frame as Christmas. So it's these blatant attacks on Christians, on Christianity, and Christian traditions because that's what they hate. That's the enemy, right? It's not this. Well, it's an ideological war. It's just a battle between ideas. They just really want to set up government programs. No, they want to crowd out the church. They want the church to be totally replaced by the state. They want Christians to be removed from political office, right? Why do they really hate Trump? Is it because he's brash? Is it because he says mean stuff on Twitter? Is it because he's really just mean to those poor dreamers, those poor immigrants? No, it's because he is the first president to actually mention Jesus. He's the first president to put a level of high importance on the Christian faith, right? He gets things through the government process, like overturning Roe v. Wade, that supports Christianity broadly. That's the attack. It's not about Trump. It's not about the economy. It's not about, well, actually, there's other persecuted groups beside Christians in the world. No, it's they hate Christianity. They hate it. They will do everything to destroy it. Everything. And it's not a coincidence that they hate this. Do I think they're consciously saying, I'm just going to destroy everything Christian? No, I think it's a subconscious hatred fueled by naive concupiscence, and I think that it's absurd that we've let the West rot to such a point that we're even having these conversations, that we're even having large support for political violence, or we're even having, a country being held hostage by a rogue political party because they just want a one last ditch effort. It's astonishingly evil that we've allowed our world to get to such a point that Nigeria is able to kill more than 50,000 Christians in less than 20 years. Everything's attack on Christianity. Mass illegal immigration is attack on the familial bond of countrymen, right? We're in a shared country, we're kind of like a family, and allowing a mass pouring in of immigrants is like letting strangers into your house. So they have to get rid of that. Marriage is a Christian sacrament, right? It's a sacrament. One of the 7 sacraments of the church is marriage. They have to get rid of that at every single level. And it's the basic building block of the body politic. The going off of marriage, the cooperation and connection between the two sexes has to be destroyed at every single level. That's where transgenderism comes into play. Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christian holidays, they have to get destroyed. Christopher Columbus, the settlers, the founding fathers, these are Christians who founded Christian land in Christian countries and founded Christian institutions. They have to be destroyed. It's attack on the common enemy. And frankly, if we don't notice this, if we don't largely as a conservative movement acknowledge that it's an attack on not just the idea of conservatism, but that the core of conservatism is Christianity. The church is the lifeblood of the Republican Party and of the conservative movement, and that's what they're attacking. They don't care about the fiscal, they don't care about that stuff really. They attack that stuff because it's tied to the nucleus of the party, the lifeblood, which is Christian virtue. We have to acknowledge what they're attacking so we can defend it and attack them. Because if they're attacking the front gate and we're defending the back door, they're going to break in and destroy our fortress. We can't let that happen. We have to acknowledge what they're attacking, defend it, and attack them stronger, harder, and meaner, justly, but meaner than they did us. Anyways, that will do it for our episode of the Old Fashioned Podcast. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.